Also that last week y'all talked about integrity. And so I picked a topic that I think fits well with that. But we'll get into that in a second. The first thing I want to do is I want to give us a verse for us to look at and to kind of guide our thoughts as we go through the discussion that we're going to have for the next 20 or 30 minutes here. So in 1 Corinthians 6:12, I'm going to read it and then we'll talk about it. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Now, depending on the translation you have, you may or may not have those quotes there. When the Greek was written, Paul did not provide us with quotes. It is the interpreters trying to figure out, okay, is this Paul saying his own words, or is this something that he is saying that they said? And so you'll get different translations that go different ways. There are people who think that this is not of Paul. This is not something that he has said. There are some that think that it comes from the idea in Galatians 5, where he talks about this freedom that we have in Christ. There's all these different kind of theories on this, but nonetheless, he is starting with an idea that he is going to modify. Because see, for Paul, he very much is aware that once you are in Christ, you are a new creation. You do have this freedom. And so this idea that all things are back on the table, well, think about it. From some of the things that the Jewish people were doing to now saying, wait, circumcision? We can get rid of that one. We don't have to do the sacrifices. We don't have to do some of these. It would have felt like a lot of these things were being taken off the list. And so in a lot of ways, they would have felt like maybe the law was being undone. In fact, Jesus himself, when he's teaching, he says, look, it may seem this way, but I didn't come to abolish the law. And so Paul is doing sort of his thing here with that, where he says, look, all things are lawful, but I'm going to tweak it just slightly. And he gives us two conditions after that. The first is, not all things are helpful. Now, there are a lot of things that we can do, and it may be okay. There may not be some sort of literal law in the Bible that says you don't do this specific things. But Paul says the first thing you should ask yourself is it helpful? Is it helpful for you? Is it helpful for the people around you? This is the first thing you should ask, because, see, there's a lot of things we do that are, frankly, just a waste of time. There are a lot of things that we do that in the long run may feel good for us, but we know as that plays out, it's not helpful for us in the long run. And so Paul says, all things may be lawful, but are all things helpful? And then the second, he says, but I will not be dominated by anything. Different translations are going to get you different words there, but this word is playing off this idea of lawful. It's based on the same Greek word, this word for authority. He's rewording it and saying, yeah, you may have this freedom, you may not have this authority that says you cannot do it, but are you giving your authority to something that you shouldn't be? Because there are a lot of things in life that once you start getting into it, you figure out, guess what? You've now got a new master. You've got something that is telling you what to do as opposed to you telling it what to do. So this is the thought that I want us to take through our discussion. All things may be lawful, but is it helpful? And is it something that actually might be becoming our master? I want you to think for a second about this scenario. Imagine a salesman comes door to door. I don't know if y'all get those in Paducah. We get those in Bowling Green. It's annoying. It's always the worst time. My dog goes crazy every time the bell goes, all that. It's how it is. But he comes to the door and he tells you about this amazing product. And he goes through and he's listing off all the benefits of it. He's telling you how it's going to make your life so much easier, so much better. He's going on and on and on. And then eventually you say, well, what is your experience with it? And the salesman says, I wouldn't use that. Wait a second. What? No, you're telling me you've never used this? No, I wouldn't dare use it. How would you feel about that product? Regardless of all the great things said at the beginning, that would be a major red flag. But yet here's the thing. There is something today that you are constantly being sold is an amazing product that is absolutely going to change your life, make your life better. so much, all the things it can do. It's amazing. But yet the very people that had hands in creating it say, I'm not using that thing. And most of us have it, if not in our pocket, right next to us. See, when we think about integrity, when we think about spiritual growth, the first thing I thought of is how this thing right here has undermined so much of that for so many people. Technology, smartphones, social media, every one of these things, we're going to go through, and I'm going to show you that the people that had a hand in making this, they're saying, no, I'm not using that. And that should be a red flag to us. That should make you think about how your relationship with this is. It should make you think, is this something that is helpful, or is this something that's controlling me? Let's start through some of our list here. So these are all tech leaders, some names you recognize, some you may not, who in different ways have said, this is not for my family. So for example, Bill Gates, he limited all the technology time for his kids, and he would not allow any of his kids to have a cell phone until 14. Snapchat CEO, I put these out of order, sorry, Steve Jobs. He would not, think about this, Steve Jobs, I don't know if you know who that is, Apple, iPad guy, right? He would not let his own kids use an iPad. He created it. And yet he said, no, my kids aren't having that. Not only that, he limited screen time, which, as Jed mentioned before, right, this is before cell phones. This is television. He says, even television, I'm going to limit the amount of time my kids are on that. The CEO of Snapchat, they're up there. 1.5 hours screen time per week, not day. I don't know how many of y'all get a report on your phone of your screen time. It was 1.5 hours per week. And this is the guy that is the CEO of Snapchat, which for all the teens, they use it. Some of y'all adults may not be into that. The CEO of Google, not Google, but the parent company, his 11-year-old son had no cell phone, and he limits TV time. Microsoft CEO, the newest one, gets reports on what their kids do on the computer. I mean, think about this. These are all the people that are high up in these different scenarios. And what are they saying? They're saying, that's not for us. So here's a quote, and this is exactly what I was afraid of, Jed. I'm young, but I'm not this young. So I don't have this on my paper, but I'm having to read it back here. So this is the former vice president of growth for Facebook. So the person who's essentially getting more and more users and people onto Facebook, this is what I think it's a she, what she said about this. She said, I'm in control of my decisions, which is, we don't use that stuff. I don't use that stuff. I can control my kids' decisions, which is, they're not allowed to use that stuff. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. This is a person whose job it is to get more people onto Facebook. Now, that little phrase there at the end, you may not have thought about dopamine and what it does in your body. And frankly, unless I'm hired here, it may be the last time you hear about it. But I talk about this all the time because our world is geared around that very thing. Facebook, teens, they may not even have a Facebook account anymore. Why? Because there's Instagram, which guess what Facebook also owns, but they realize they've got an even better dopamine hit. And now it's all about shorts, which used to be Vines back in the day, but now it's all TikTok and shorts and this. But that's an even better dopamine hit. But they know the way to get more clients, the way to get more money, the way to get more all of this is to abuse this chemical in your body, that just that little like button, or every time you refresh it at the top, every one of these were tools that were created by these people who said, it made them rich. But because of that, they realize, I'm not letting my kids have any part of that. I got another quote here. Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, he has publicly called himself something of a conscientious objector on social media, and has said that God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. And I can keep going. And in fact, as we go on, I'm going to give you more quotes. Because here's the thing. These guys, they're saying this because they get to see behind the curtain. Right? They're the ones that designed what's behind the curtain. But for too many of us, all we see is that goofy Apple ad with the meteoroid coming from outer space and, ooh, now it's in titanium. And we see all these things every time. And you're just constantly fed this, how amazing this stuff is. But how often are you running into the salesman who doesn't even use the product? How often are you running into an IT person that's telling you this is destroying not just individuals' lives, but companies? There's all this kind of stuff going on out there, but for the average person, we're not aware of it. Why? Because if we got aware of it, some people would lose some money and their bottom line wouldn't be as good. Now, the Royal Society of Public Health, they did this study. It's actually back in, I think it was 2012, something like that. But this is a British, health and safety company sort of thing. And they did this study called Status of Mind. That's what, or status, or, whatever. It's even got a hashtag in there. It's all cool. But they did this thing where they surveyed. This is all self-reported. They said, we want you to tell us how you feel after using all these different social media apps. And it's all self-reported, but they had, I think it was 13 different categories, and you'll see them here in a second. But they said, how do you feel in this area after using this product? And they did it for YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, I think Snapchat, and Instagram. This was pre-TikTok. So as you'll see in a second, you can imagine how much worse TikTok may be. So they did these different categories, and the only one that was an overall slight positive was YouTube. And once again, I cannot read that back there, so I'm going to have to look up here. But the different categories is health awareness. So how, is this something that is helping you be a healthier human? Access to health information, emotional support, anxiety, depression, loneliness, sleep. You can see that was the one that YouTube struggled with, is everybody is losing sleep because they go to the next video. But self-expression, self-identity, and then body image, real-world relationships, community building, bullying, or FOMO, which if you haven't heard is fear of missing out, right? Everybody else is doing something fun. I want to be with them doing something fun. And this is all self-reported. But you can see YouTube, the only one with a positive. Twitter, anxiety, depression, loneliness, body image, bullying, fear of missing out, sleep, all self-reported, mind you, negatives. And then you go on. Facebook, and I put them in order of overall positive to overall negative. Facebook, all the same categories, but more. Snapchat, you can see, more in some areas, less in others. Snapchat, the big one, is fear of missing out. They're seeing their friends doing all this stuff, which Snapchat also has the location feature, so you can see if all of your friends are hanging out at one spot and you're over at your house doing homework, like all this is built into these apps. And then finally, Instagram, which same thing, all those categories, but just even stronger. So what do we have? We have the guys who created it. They're like, my family's not using that stuff. You have the people who are using it who say, okay, this is not good for me. And this is their own words saying, I feel worse after this. Well, what about some other things? What about some studies? And this is relatively new, but you're getting more and more studies coming out every day that looks just like this, which this is from the American Psychological Association. This was done back in early 2023, back in February. It says reducing social media use significantly improves body image in teens and young adults. I mean, have you been talking to young girls? Have you talked to teenage girls? I'm currently youth ministry. That's something I do. You'd be surprised how many, anxiety, depression, they've got ways to deal with that. This is the thing that they will readily admit that they're struggling with. As we talked about, it's everywhere. It's not just on these social media apps, every commercial. It's just one after the other of seeing people who are well manicured with filters, and they got a makeup team and a wardrobe team, and everything it's so manicured and perfect and no hair out of place. This is what they're seeing day after day after day. And so studies like this, I'd imagine there's only going to be more because people are finally coming around to figure it out. Now, there's a name here that I want you to kind of remember. But his name is Jonathan Hyatt. He goes by John Hyatt, I guess, on his Substack. But he's kind of one of the big ones. Him and Jean Twenge, which if you don't know who Jean Twenge is, she's a generational researcher. She wrote the book called iGen, which is a really clever way of talking about this generation that's been raised with iPhones, that they just, like when I was 16, 17, it was still one of the like brick phones that I had to, charge before I left because it might not have enough battery. But, they were raised with these iPhones. And so these two have really started to push. They've done things in front of Congress. They're trying to push for healthier social media. And he is just, you can go to his website. He's collected all this studies, all this stuff. And here's his major takeaway. Is social media is a major cause of the mental health illness epidemic in teen girls. And here's the evidence. This is one of his articles that's summarizing a bunch of his other work. But he shows this graph, and I don't have time to get all into it. If you want to see me afterwards, I can provide you with plenty of references and links. Now, once again, screen's a little smaller than I would have hoped, but you can kind of see it's about 2012. This doesn't have a laser pointer, does it? No. So right when that starts to go up, that top line, all these different lines are generations, age groups. And right around that 2012 point, you can see that top line, that youngest generation, that's what that is, 18 to 25-year-old. Those are issues of self-harm or depression that are hospitalization. So anytime that they have in the medical records that somebody shows up struggling from one of these sort of things, that measure skyrockets. And what he points to is not to the start of an iPhone, not to the start of some of these social media companies, but actually the like button, the share button, and the infinite scroll. That a lot of these features kind of came out around the same time, and this made it to where it just became gasoline on what was already a started fire. And he does a lot of studies pointing to that social media use, and especially some of these features, are just really, really, like he said, an epidemic for young girls. Now, you may be thinking, this is a young people problem, right? I mean, look, the data kind of bears that out. That bottom line is 50 years or older. They don't have any issues, right? I'm going to give you two anecdotal situations. They're not study-based or anything like that. But in our congregation, I'm kind of the techie guy. If they have a question about this or about that, people tend to come to me. And one guy who's 70 plus, he needed help with his computer and also needed some help with his cell phone. Nowadays, two-factor authentication and all that stuff, you end up having to work on both if you're helping anybody. And so I'm working through it, and on both computer and cell phone, I found a lot of, we'll just say unclean search history. And you would like to think this is only a young person problem, but it's not. We had a different gathering where it was a bunch of, it was an older kind of group at our church. We were getting together, and it was a fellowship event, so everybody was kind of sitting around talking. And there was a 70-year-old woman that I watched, that 70 plus, I'm not going to say her exact age or whatever, but anyway, 70 or older, sit on her phone the entire time, didn't really talk to other people, went from game to game to game, Candy Crush, Sudoku, game to game to game the entire time. And the reason it's such a young person problem is because for young people, they haven't established a lot of the rhythms in life that adults have. But see, there are things in an adult's life that can cause you to change your rhythms as well. See, that 70-year-old man, he lost his wife, and he was home alone. And he was spending the last 5 or 10 years of his life taking care of his dying wife. But when she's gone, he didn't have anything to do. And he was lonely. And man, imagine when you've got that as a struggle, and over there on your coffee table is the exact drug that seems to scratch that itch that you have. That's the way this stuff works, is it's there, and it's so easy, it's so prevalent that it's so hard to just continue to say no. You think about how these smartphones work. They essentially take all the temptations we have and make them right in your very pocket. If you have a gambling addiction, guess what? You can gamble from your phone. If you have a lust addiction, that's very much on your phone. If you're an angry person and you're just always looking for a fight, go to Facebook, talk about politics, right? There's all these things, whatever your struggle is. If you just want attention and you want praise from people, well, go and manicure a picture and post it on Instagram or on Facebook, and you get all the likes. Whatever your struggle is, there is an app for that. And that's why this is so dangerous. Because it's not just those that are struggling with lust. It's not just those that are, lazy and looking for something to fill their time. It's all of it. Because they've realized how much money they can make through all these apps. And so whatever you may want, they make an app so that they can get a little bit of money off of it. You ever think about this? You think about how much money some of these companies make. So, for example, here's some of the worth of these companies. And I'll go ahead and say Facebook, a lot of these have things that own it. So, for example, YouTube is owned by Google. Facebook is the one where that's kind of their broad parent company name. And so TikTok is the actual app. YouTube is the actual app. Facebook is also Meta, which includes Instagram and all their other subsidiaries. But all these, 30 billion. This little square that's on this screen in my pocket that I have access to is worth 30 billion. You ever think about how you can get that for free? 30 billion worth of money is poured into developing that little square on your screen. How do you get it for free? This quote, how many of y'all have heard this before? If something is free, you're the product. One, the guy that's been nodding with me all along, he's like, yeah, I've heard this one. This quote was kind of made recently popular by a movie called The Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it. It's a great documentary that talks about all the stuff I'm talking about. It was made popular by that. This quote is actually from 1979 by a guy who was talking about television. You think about it. My parents, they used to have a giant antenna in their backyard. It's a cheap antenna, and it could pick up all the channels within, 100 miles or whatever. And we didn't pay except for the antenna. But this artist, and let me give you his name. Y'all may know him. I may not be old enough. Richard Serra, apparently a sculptor and video artist from actually 1973. But he said this, and he said, it's free because they're just connecting you to advertisers, right? And this is television. That's totally different, but it's the same idea. The reason it's free, you can get into the data stuff. We're not going to. But the reason it's free is because they're connecting your eyeballs with somebody that's going to pay them millions so that they can just prove you've been sitting there looking at their ad. That's all it takes. They don't care about if these products are actually making your life any better. And a lot of these quotes, the reason these quotes are out there is because certain of these people got to the point they're like, I quit. I can't do it. And they leave the company and they start to tell people about, hey, this is what we're doing and this is why you should be concerned. So here, let me give you another quote. This is from, these are all tech developers. He says, it's the gradual, slight, imperceptible change in your own behavior and perception that's the product. If they can get you to stay on the app 30 seconds more, that's millions of dollars for them. If they can get every person to stay on a little bit longer, to watch one more ad, to be, looking at the screen, which they can verify, all of that just a little bit longer, they make millions of dollars. That's their bottom line. And they're going to continue to do it. Here's another one. And this is the guy that's kind of the main character in The Social Dilemma. He says, we're training and conditioning a whole new generation of people that when we're uncomfortable or lonely or uncertain or afraid, we have a digital pacifier for ourselves. How many times do people get into an awkward, room, you collect them together and it's one of those awkward situations, maybe it's a singles lunch or something like that, but everybody gets in the room, they feel uncomfortable, and what do? Boom, immediately. But this is what we're allowing to happen. What I say, is it helpful, and are we being dominated by it? Now, this is all great. I've spent 30 minutes talking about the problem. I'm sorry. Y'all put sermon or worship last, so you don't have a good way to kick me out at a certain time. I'm sorry about that. But here's the problem. Our world revolves around these things. My wife works from home. It's a great tool. Just like everything, right? It can be this great tool for so much good. How in the world do we make sure that it's helpful for us and that we're not being dominated by it? And I'm going to start to look at that. So Romans 12, 1 and 2. This is one of my favorite verses because I think it's a good model for anything you need to work on in your life. I think it's a good place to start. So do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. That by testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. First thing, do not be conformed. That's passive. The original language, it's passive. You know what that tells you? That if you're not actively working on it, it's happening to you. It's not something you have to choose to do. See, being conformed to the world happens. It's like atrophy, right? It's the entropy, that it's if you're not trying, it's going to happen. The old saying that my father-in-law used to always say, it's like a plane. If you're not moving forward, then you're falling, right? Don't be conformed to the world. It's an active process that you have to say, no, the world's trying to push in on me. It's trying to say I need this cell phone. It's trying to say I need to be on TikTok or on this or that, and push back against and say that, no. That's the world talking. That's not God talking. That's the first thing. The second thing is be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So I want to show you this quote. Edward Tufte, he says, there are only two industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. It feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? It's a drug. It's almost like caffeine, right? It's the socially acceptable drug. You can get hooked to it, and that's okay. Yeah, he spends a lot of time on his phone. It's okay. He's working on it. This guy, this artist, he went around and he got families and people to just recreate situations. So he'd find somebody in a situation and he'd say, all right, stop. I want to take a picture of you, but I just want to remove the cell phone and show what it looks like. And as we think about like changing our mind, I want you to think about if that cell phone wasn't there in these pictures, how ridiculous these look. We had a marriage class this morning. How many times in bed are the last 20, 30 minutes look just like that, right? What about this? Maybe they're newlywed on their honeymoon, sitting in each other's lap, but staring at a cell phone. Family time at home, right? They're on their device, you're on your device. Sitting out, two guys that could be talking. Kids at home. Instead of playing games together, they're all playing their own thing. Having a barbecue, right? That's always fun, social gathering. There's you just married, there's you another one. What about dinner time at home, right? Sandy P., here's another former Facebook person. She said, there's only a handful of people at these companies who truly understand how these algorithms work. And even they don't necessarily fully understand what's going to happen. So, with a specific piece of whatever, they can't tell you exactly how it's going to play out, but they may have a vague idea, but this is a handful of people. And so it says, as humans, we've almost lost control over these systems because they're controlling the information that we see. They're controlling us more than we're controlling them. Your YouTube algorithm, your For You page on Twitter, all of this is designed by a handful of people that are trying to maximize those dials, right? If I can do this little change and it gets 30 more seconds of somebody on here, that's millions of dollars for us. And they keep tweaking these dials just for the sake of making more money and keeping people on the apps longer. They're not concerned with whether or not you get a video that's actually helpful and building you up or helps you be a better person. We got to change the way we think about what it is that we spend our time on and with. In the last part of Romans 2, it's by testing, right? It's going to take multiple attempts. You're not just going to be able to figure it out. Now, we talked about solitude. Luke 5:16, but now even more, the report about him went abroad. Jesus is gaining popularity. There's great crowds gathering to hear him and to be healed, but he would often withdraw to desolate places and pray. If there was ever a person who said, I don't have time to be alone. I don't have time to do this or to do that. Jesus could have said, I am healing people. I'm spreading the gospel. I'm doing all the things that are most important. But even he realized how key this was for our spiritual growth, for his relationship with the Father. If he didn't take time to go off by himself, he would not be successful in his ministry. Solitude is necessary for a healthy life. Of all the people who could have said it's not necessary, Jesus realized just how important it was. Solitude can help when times get difficult. You think about when Jesus found out in Matthew 14 that John the Baptist had been beheaded. What did he do? He went off by himself and he prayed. And then finally, solitude is not just about being alone, it's about being alone with just God. Because when you're alone, you realize that he is there. You start to realize that you're actually not alone. See, being alone with God, it's not just about being away from other people. It's about being with God. And it's not being alone with our phone. It's being alone with silence. It's being alone in nature. It's being alone with the Father. Exodus 14:13-14 says this, and Moses said to the people, fear not. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you'll never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. Some of the translations will say, be still. But you think about it, being still, you can also be very uncomfortable, right? I could be still, but saying, they're coming. They've got a lot of weapons. They've got a lot of horses. We're going to die. Moses, what are you doing? But silence can show a level of trust in God. That you don't feel the need to fill the air with words, right? I don't have to just keep talking. It's like Habakkuk. The Lord is in his temple, right? The Lord is in control. All the fighting and all the things that we do to try to make our lives better and to work hard at all this, God has more control than we could ever want or ever handle. And we just need to go to him in prayer and say, God, I trust that if I'm faithful to you, you will do what's right. See, silence expresses that you trust in a good God who wants what is best for you and for his world. Silence is a practice of the wise. Proverbs 29:11 says, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. Finally, silence is more than just not talking. It's an inward reality. Allow times for yourself to sit and be with your own thoughts, to humble yourself before God, to realize that for all your efforts, you have access to the creator of the universe. And if you just put your faith and trust in him, he can do more than you could ever do by yourself. Our world is speeding up. There's a lot more fun facts and things I could share with you, but this has been the case not just for the last 20 years, for the last 100 years. It's only getting faster. We're only getting busier. And what we need more than anything is to say, wait, is this busyness good? Is this helpful? Are these things helping me to be a better Christian? Or do I need to disconnect from all this? Do I need to test and find ways to make sure that this thing in my life is actually helping me grow closer to God? And we need to find opportunities for solitude, to get by ourselves. And because of cell phones, that's harder to do. You almost got to shut your phone off because everybody's going to be texting you or Snapchatting you or messaging you, right? But you got to find times to get alone with God, to be silent before him. Allow your brain to slow down and to focus on what's truly important in this life. If you're here and you're not a Christian, you can try all you want, but your life will never have meaning until you give it over to Jesus. God is the one that created us. He's the one that gives us purpose in our life. He's the one that gives our life meaning. He's the one that helps us to navigate all this stuff in the world, that the world is just trying to chew you up and spit you out. But yet God wants you to have life to the full. That's what Jesus said. If you're here and you're not a Christian, man, that is more important than anything else. Or if you are a Christian and you want the prayers of the church, I'm not sure what your normal practice is, but if nothing else, see me afterwards. And I'll love to talk to you about any of this. So whatever it is, let's move on now to our song.